So, really on the last paragraph of the Hebrew, which I'll translate for you, and I gave you the English. English is a fair translation, but I'll try to be a little bit more specific. The question he was dealing with last time is this. We're talking about God. And one feature that has to be worked on is God's unity. We say in the Shema, God is one. It doesn't only mean that he's unique. It means that he's unique. Nothing else is like him. But it also means that there's no compound nature, no combined elements, no amalgamation of different features. There's no contribution from different dimensions or sources. The way you put it formally is that no number larger than one applies to him in any way whatsoever. The Hebrew word for that is pashut. Pashut means utter simplicity. Utter simplicity means no division, because if you're made out of 2 or 16 or 104 elements, then you're not simple. You have this complexity. And he's utterly not complex. Now, on the other side, there are many characteristics that we associate with God. Being all-knowing and all-powerful and righteous and merciful and just. There's a lot of them. And it doesn't sound like one, it sounds like a bunch. And he points out that in a human being, each of these characteristics are different, including psychological qualities or capabilities like memory or will. They're different for 2 different reasons. One reason is because their definitions are different. Memory is not will, and will is not justice, and justice is not mercy. And also, in a human being, these qualities vary independently. You learn them at different times. One can become stronger while the other one becomes weaker. You can gain one or lose one. So these qualities in human beings are definitely different qualities. Now, we're being told that in one sense, God has all these qualities, and in another sense, he's not multiple. And through the initial hearing, it sounds like a simple contradiction. If you have 16 qualities, then you're not one, you're 16. Or you have 16 parts, 16 aspects. So you're not, you have a number other than one that truly describes you. Now, the Ramchal says here that the reason we're having trouble with understanding this is because of the limitation of our minds. And he now makes a remark that is carried out in all the Kabbalistic sources of which I'm aware, and to a certain extent is implied by the philosophical sources and even by direct verses. A human being is combined of a combination of body and soul. The soul includes the intellect, at least the human intellect. Animals have understanding also, even have the ability to solve problems. That's part of their material nature. The human intellect is an aspect of the soul. Now, how well integrated are body and soul? Are they both online, full strength, simultaneously all the time? According to our picture, no. There's some parts of the soul which, while the soul is embodied in this body, aren't accessible to a human being. Certainly not consciously, and to a certain extent, not even unconsciously. So the full capacity of intellect is hidden from us. It's just as if you decided to take black and white photography. I don't know if you're aware, there's a black and white photography is often much more dramatic than color photography. Because when you see black and white, your mind has to invent the colors. And when your mind works to invent the colors, it involves itself in the picture in a much more gripping way than when it can be totally passive and just receive the colors. So what do? You put a filter on your lens so that only the black and white show up. So you're filtering out the color. Now you have a purpose for doing that because you want to achieve a certain effect. but something's lost. In a similar way, when the body and mind, when the body and soul become interactive, when they interact with one another, we lose conscious contact with certain aspects of the soul. That's why learning in our world starts with the physical world. And what we learn by abstracting from the physical world. You learn numbers by counting fingers and peanuts. You don't learn numbers abstractly. You teach your children, parents can't teach you 2 plus 2 is 4. They can teach you how to use the symbols, but that's just marks on paper, by just what we're learning Chinese. To learn the concept of a number, you take physical objects, you arrange them in certain ways, and you describe them and interact with them. And then from that you say, see, this and this and this, that's all called 2. You start from the physical. So you learn to build your concepts up out of experience with the physical. The most dramatic example of this is something called the Song of Songs, one of the books of the Bible. This is a love song between a king and his beloved. They reach out to each other and miss each other and have misunderstandings, and all sorts of events take place in the Song of Songs. The whole of the tradition understands it as a parable for the love between God and the Jewish people. So Maimonides, in the 10th chapter of the Laws of Repentance, mentions that the way a human being should love God is the way a man is, I would use the word infatuated, that's what he describes, can't get her out of his mind, treasures every moment with her, bemoans every moment that he's absent from her, and she's constantly, her image and her presence follows him wherever he goes. That should be, and he says, just like Solomon said in the Song of Songs. Now, I think the Rambam was a great philosopher. In part, is sort of apologizing. I'm explaining to you what it is to love God. Why should I have to do that by analogy? Why should I have to take an analogy from earthly human love? As I'll tell, he asked me the question, ask Solomon, that's what he did. But the deep point is that the way God enables our mind, which is located in the soul, to function in this world through its connection in the body, the way he enables that to take place, the only learning that can take place here is through physical experiences. Through the physical experiences, you could draw analogies to a realm that's not physical, the spiritual realm. So you are learning about the spiritual realm, but only by abstracting from the physical realm. In a way, this is why some of the descriptions of God are taken directly from physical experience. Ovinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. So you experience what a father is, you experience what a king is, so then you use those as ways to create concepts and relationships with God, because that's where we start from. Now, I said to you that it's universal in the Kabbalistic vocabulary, it's implied in some of the philosophical vocabulary, and it's even, I would say, broadly indicated by verses in the Torah. Moses says to God, I want you to reveal yourself to me in such a way that I will understand you. God says to him, I cannot do that, because Ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai, man cannot see me and live. Okay, now if you're a lawyer, you get it right away. But what about after death? The barrier is because you're alive. When you're not alive, the barrier isn't there. So the barrier is the body. So there are 2 solutions to this barrier. One is Maimonides' solution, which is ultimately, after you die, only the soul goes into the world to come. The body doesn't come along. And then that barrier isn't bothering you. The Kabbalistic solution to the problem is the body transforms. This body doesn't come along. This body is transformed into something which, if I would give you a very, very rough analogy, it would be like music. You know what a musical score is? And where the music is written down in notes on paper, right? Versus the actual sounds. Now, both of them are Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Really? When you look at the notes, you don't hear anything. When you hear the piano being played, you close your eyes, you don't see anything. Yeah, but they're both sort of. I mean, this is in sounds, and this is in symbolic notes. So there's a transformation of the body that takes place to the extent that something which represents the body, which was the body in a certain stage, remains, but it's much more different from the body that we have than the musical notes are from the actual sounds of the music. So, according to the Kabbalists, you take some bodily element along into the world to come, but because it's transformed, it's not a barrier anymore. And according to Maimonides, you don't take the body along at all, and the contrast here is not as great as I'm making it sound, but I'm not going to go into that now, unless you want to hear it. So, but the idea is that when from the verse, "For man cannot see me and live," you hear right away that a barrier to seeing God is because we're in this state of existence, where the soul and the body are interacting, and that enforces certain limitations. So now, the implication is the reason we have difficulty in understanding God, this really is what the verse is about, is because our intellect is bound to the starting point of this world, and the starting point of this world creates an intellectual starting point and process, which means that given that way of developing thought, it's not going to be appropriate to understanding what God is. The particular problem here is a problem of unity. Things that look disparate are ultimately unified in a way that it's beyond our ability to conceive. Now, I can give you examples, but these are examples where we have succeeded, or seem to have succeeded, and it's that quality of success which up until 150 years ago wouldn't have been dreamt of. For example, you live in a world with very many different kinds of materials. Imagine someone told you that all of them are made out of 3 pieces. There are only 3 original pieces. And everything in the world is just combinations of those 3 pieces. That's all. There are thousands of different materials in the world. Thousands. I think you would find that just utterly fantastic. It would be inconceivable. Everything's made out of 3 pebbles? And just mixtures of 3 pebbles? Well, in early atomic theory, there were protons, neutrons, and electrons. Sof pasuk, that was the end of the story. 3 particles, and everything's made out of 3 particles. That's an astounding unification. 150 years ago, no one would be able to understand what you were talking about. They would think of such a project as absolutely inconceivable. So, that being the case, you see what the kind of unification requires, and how you could be at a state of understanding where you wouldn't be able to understand what the words meant. I'll tell you something else. My field was philosophy and mathematics. The whole language of mathematics can be developed out of one primitive idea, and that's set membership. If you set membership, all of the vocabulary of mathematics can be explicitly defined. You only need one concept to define all of it. Functions and spaces and transformations and vectors, and all of it is definable in terms of one thing. It's an astonishing simplification of vocabulary. Before you've seen it done, it's very hard to understand what it means, what it contains. Something about God's existence is that what for us is many things, and we can't combine them because their definitions conflict and because they vary separately. For God, they're only expressions of one single, undivided unity. Another example that Maimonides gives is, in functional terms, is fire. What effect does fire have on things to which it's applied? Well, it depends upon what things they are. Some soft things become hard, like meat. You burn it to a crisp, it becomes very hard, whereas before it was soft and malleable. And when you apply fire to the metal, it becomes soft, the hard things become soft. Some things become edible, some become inedible. Some things are enhanced, and some things are destroyed. It's not that the fire is different, it's that the things they're applied to are different. The fire is all just combustion. And you could do all the same thing with heat, which wasn't generated by combustion, as you very well know. And heat is just random motion of molecules, random molecular motion. So this one thing can have very many different expressions, even though it's one thing at source. So categorically, we understand the idea. We just don't know how to apply it in this particular case. And Ramchal says we are limited in principle from being able to understand. Now, this limitation of the intellect has many applications, some of which, I say the clock's not working, some of which are very, very surprising. I said to you that Solomon wrote the Song of Songs as an expression of love between God and man. And man and God, both sides. And Maimonides says to love God is like being infatuated. There was a medieval Kabbalist who made the following remark. I have to listen carefully so that you don't let your mind twist what I say into something that's more familiar. He said that a man who has not felt sexual desire for a woman is a donkey and less than a donkey. Let's try that again and be sure we got it right. A man who has not felt sexual desire for a woman is a donkey, it means he's not human. Or he's less than a donkey, he's not even an animal. You say, what? Where is he coming from? Is that a Jewish idea? Maybe it's a Hindu idea, with some of the Vedas that talk about sex and its own and so on. How could this be a Jewish idea? Well, the answer is that your experiences in this world are supposed to be vehicles, raw material for relating to God in the appropriate way. The sexual desire, such a powerful, driving experience, it delivers such, I won't say unequaled, unparalleled pleasure, but such immense pleasure that, that's because you don't know about Beethoven's Ninth. And if you did, you're going to understand there could be other pleasure that's also powerful. And Bartok's Fourth String Quartet. That this also has to contribute. Now, when you hear Maimonides' description of infatuation, constantly in mind, can't get it out of your mind, so forth and so on. If a person didn't have experiences like that, you'd think, maybe this isn't healthy. You have one idea in your mind all the time. You're kind of one-dimensional. What's about the rest of your life? Don't you have the ability to spread out and apply yourself in many ways? You could think of it that way, but when you experience love together with sexual desire, you know that the concentration doesn't crowd out other things, it includes other things. Imagine I'm sitting with my wife, whom I love dearly, and we're watching a sunset. Now, I think to myself, man, this is a challenging situation because I love my wife and I love the sunset. So 1 minute for the wife, 1 minute for the sunset, trade off, give them equal time. No, the fact that I'm sitting with my wife makes me enjoy the sunset more. And the fact that we're enjoying a sunset together makes us love each other more. They contribute to each other. They don't compete with each other. You take the love along with you. So if you have earthly love of this kind, and you experience that, then you understand that the love for God can be the same thing. You take it along because He's with you under all conditions. So everything that happens is part of the cementing of the love relationship with God. And the same is true with sexual desire. Sexual desire is driving, powerful, it galvanizes attention, it galvanizes tremendous effort, and it delivers a reward. And when it's in the appropriate circumstances, the old-fashioned way in heterosexual marriage, which is redundant. Yes, it's redundant. You don't have to say heterosexual. Otherwise, it isn't really marriage. And you can quote me. When there's giving, when each one is identified with the other one's satisfaction and the other one's pleasure, and is happy, I would say even happiest when the other one has the pleasure. So then it becomes an exquisitely binding experience. Binding in a human way it's a kind of cement, not the only or maybe even the main cement in a relationship, but it's a cement in a relationship. So you see that this kind of giving and receiving pleasure, because if she wants to give to me and I receive it from her, then I'm satisfying her wish to please me. That's also part of it. It's reciprocal and double in both. It reflects back on itself in both directions. So then you say, okay, so then this is, in physical terms, what the Kadosh Baruch Hu wants us to have with Him. All of our learning of the spiritual world is extracted from or abstracted from the physical world. And since that's the way we learn some ideas, we learn them and can apply them, but the unity behind it is what we miss. That's what the Ramchal says. So we are left with a description whose ultimate explanation we don't understand, and we're told, yes, you're not going to understand this. As we said several times ago, he starts off with the statement that nothing understands the nature of God's existence other than God Himself. Now here, I'll stop for questions. Here, I just want to point out what I just said in the name of the Ramchal, what I said from the Rambam aren't exactly the same. Because I understand from the Ramchal that this is a categorical limitation, that it's not just because we're connected with the body, but a creature can't understand its creator, and the Rambam says no, it's limited by the fact that we are connected to the body. Without that barrier, we would be able to understand. In either case, where we are now, we can't understand. So we're being told that there's a limit that beyond which we can't go. Questions up to here?
Rabbi Gottleib was saying that, the experiences we have in this world are supposed to be a reflection of the relationship we're supposed to be having with Hashem. So, if you're talking about, for example, the love a man has for his wife, is that, practically speaking, we've got Shirashim, we've got experiences we have in this world, but is there something that we're supposed to, is there like a guide? Because, if I love my wife, I'm not going to automatically think that this is how I'm supposed to be loving Hashem. Is Rabbi Gottleib saying that that's just Metzias, that Hashem's made the world, that the way that we're supposed to relate to Him, we have those experiences in this world? Or is it that we're supposed to be taking our experiences and trying to relate them to our relationship with Hashem?
That's an interesting question. I hear the resistance, when you're engaged in expressing your love to another human being, then the other human being is supposed to be the focus of what you're doing. I think there's a way of combining the two ideas, and this is a deep thought, and it has a lot of implications. We have a mitzvah to love other Jews. If a Jew strays too far and has made himself odious in certain ways, then the mitzvah might not apply. But we're supposed to love other Jews. Now, the question always arises, anonymous Jews? How do you love, people who you don't know, who you never met, you never interacted with them? You can't love something that's blank. So part of the answer is, well, what is it that you love about the person? What is it in the person that you love? It's a mistake to think, well, I just love the person. Because take someone you love. Can you imagine saying to this person whom you love, I love you, but I wish you didn't do X? I think you can imagine that, right? Let's say X is injuring the person himself. I love you so much that I really wish you didn't do X, because I see you hurting yourself. I see you injuring yourself. But then it's not the X in him that you love. On the contrary. Because you love what's good and important about him, you wish you didn't have the X. So you don't love that. So it's fair to ask, what is it about the person that you love in him? Now suppose I say, well, the thing that's really precious in a person is his soul. Aha. Don't love his biceps. I don't love the fact that he can do the 100 yards in 10.6 seconds. That's not what I love. I love his soul. Okay. Now, what is the soul? Well, the soul in our vocabulary is called the chelek elokah mimal, which literally means, and by the word literally, I mean that's a throwaway, because often things don't mean what they literally mean. Literally, if you look up in a dictionary, it means a piece of God on high. But I have news for you. God is not a salami you can slice into pieces. So this is poetry. like a lot of Jewish text is poetry. And here it means this, that God created a world, creator on the one side, and creations on the other hand, separated by an infinite gulf. The one is the maker, and the other is the thing that's made. But among the things that are made, one stands out as expressing godliness in a more direct fashion than anything else, and that's the soul. Soul is the most godly among the creatures, among the creations. So, in a poetical sense, what do I love in the person? I love God that's in him. Now we've united being connected to the other person and bringing God into the picture. But we've united in such a way that it's not two subjects, it's not distracting, not you have to divide your attention between God over there and the person over here, but it's God's self-expression in the person that I love. And that can unite the two perspectives. I think that's a way to deal with the question. Okay, we're together so far? Okay, so now, as he had said above, there are certain beliefs, basic beliefs about God, which could be established by an intellectual analysis also, but he's not going to do that. But he wants to give us a description of them. And one of them is his unity. And he says, here it means his uniqueness, his oneness as opposed to there being more. And his oneness is in being a necessary existence. That his existence is necessary, whereas everything else has its existence from him. He makes it, he gives it its existence. That's why we call him creator. This is one of the many basic ideas that's in common to the Abrahamic faiths. That is, the faiths that trace their beginning back to Abraham, which is Judaism, AllPowerful, Christianity, and Islam. Being the creator means he is himself uncreated. He himself is necessary in existence, couldn't be otherwise. And everything else is contingent, could be otherwise, didn't have to exist, and exists only because he gives it its existence. Now, if someone asks, but Rabbi, aren't you being subtly inconsistent here? You're going to explain to me why the table and the stars and the galaxies and the mountains and the moon all exist because God made them exist. That's how you're going to explain to me how they came to be. Why shouldn't we ask the same question about God? How did he come to be? What made him exist? Well, you just draw the line and say we don't ask that question? Why? Why not be consistent and ask it all across the board? There are several answers to this question, but the first simple answer, which is found in Maimonides and in others, is this. You ask how something came to exist if you know that it came to exist. Since it came to exist, you ask, how is that? What's responsible for that? But came to exist means it wasn't and then it was. So there's a change. Something became different. But if I have something which didn't come to be, then you don't ask how it came to be. The question is a non-question. If you start off with the idea that God's existence never was absent, God's existence... So then that means that God's existence didn't come to be at all, then you don't ask how it came to be. So if that's the way the question is motivated, it doesn't apply to God, more or less by definition. And by the way, if we were, before 1965, when for thousands of years people believed that the universe didn't come to be either, the universe was infinitely old, that was Aristotle's idea, accepted universally, we wouldn't have been able to ask it about the universe either. But since 1965, where we've inherited the Big Bang, and the universe has an age, a finite age, about 13.8 billion years, so then it came to be. So then, if that's true, you can ask where it came to be, how it came to be. Right? That's why Stephen Hawking said, we didn't want there to be a beginning. We fudged the steady state theory to avoid a beginning because the beginning smacks of a creator. We didn't want that in science. So we tried to wipe that out. It just failed because of empirical reasons. The theory was dropped in 1965. So the idea is that God's existence is necessary, everything else not. Now, we're being told there's only one thing like that. Only one thing could have that kind of necessary existence. I haven't seen in the literature a proof of this, although Maimonides says it. He's quoting the words here. That can only be one that is so. I have an associated idea, which I can prove, and maybe that gives some background to it. Let's imagine that we're talking about being all-powerful. Being all-powerful. Could there be two things, each of which is all-powerful? Suppose they conflict. Who wins? To be all-powerful means nothing stands in your way. There's no resistance. You can overcome any resistance. If A is all-powerful and B is there, A must be able to manipulate, operate, and subdue B. Immediately it follows you can't have two things that are all-powerful. So if being all-powerful is part of this definition, then of course there can only be one. There can't be more than one. So we're left with the idea that everything owes its existence to this one being whose existence is necessary. That's an ongoing process. Oh, I have to disambiguate here. We're not saying now that God created everything, He made it, and I exist because He made me when? Some 79 years ago. And why do I exist today? Because I existed yesterday and nothing annihilated me in the meantime. So I owe my existence to Him because He made me, but in the meantime I'm floating along on my own. I have an inertia of existence operating on its own until something interferes. That's not our view. Our view is that God is constantly giving existence to everything in the universe. And that's not a Kabbalistic idea alone. Maimonides says so in the Guide and also in the Mishnah Torah, that God is pumping in divine energy at all times to keep the universe in existence. So He is making the world, present tense, in addition to having made it, meaning starting it off. Ramchal in this sefer, the first line says, Himtzi umamtzi. Himtzi is past tense, gave existence to. Mamtzi is present tense, gives existence to. This creates a very, very powerful spiritual image. Am I alone? Am I abandoned? Does God care? Is God involved? Does God know? Is God on vacation? He's giving existence to everything continuously. So of course He's involved in the existence and the state and the operation, in the events of everything all the time, down to the smallest particles of space-time, if you believe in quantum gravity, or continuously if you believe in string theory or other things like that, whether you have this particular universe or you don't. Continuous universe, He's involved intimately. So it's a sense of being surrounded by God, rather than abandoned and God being in heaven and distant and so forth and so on. When the Jews were at the Red Sea split and they went across and the Egyptians were drowned. They gave praise to God in the Song of the Sea. One of the verses there is, Zeh keli v'anvehu. This is my God and I will glorify Him. The word this in English and the word zeh in Hebrew is a demonstrative. A demonstrative is used to refer to something that's present and visible. I can only say this book about a book that's in front of me. It's interesting, in English, this and that are not equivalent at all. That book could be in my room, but this book has to be here, where you can see it, where you can point to it. So when you say, this is my God and I will glorify Him, He must have been present. Where was He present? How was he present? So our poetical description of how God sustains the world is that everything that exists has in it a spark of holiness. That spark of holiness is what gives the thing its existence. But the spark is encased in a shell. The shell is opaque, so you don't see the light. For a moment, all the shells became transparent. And they were surrounded by a blaze of holy light, which was the expression of God's will, giving everything its existence all around them. So they said, they pointed their fingers, they said, this is my God. He made it visible, the fact that his presence is everywhere. Again, his presence means his will, not more or less than that, his will. This is the idea of the spiritual implication that you're not alone. So now the Shulchan Aruch opens in the Ashkenazi version with the words, I've placed God before me continuously. What does it mean, placed God before me? It means it's a little bit like the way you could behave if you wanted to about atoms. You know everything's made of atoms, right? But you can't see them. That's scientific theory. Imagine this person said, I want to be in touch with reality all the time. I know everything's made of atoms, so I make sure to picture in my mind. So I have this picture that the table's just atoms fitted together, the air is atoms, with particles floating around. Just sort of picturing atoms everywhere. Now, I have to use my imagination to be conscious of that picture, but the picture is a picture of reality. It's not a fantasy. Things really are made of atoms. So I'm connecting to a reality by having that picture in my head. That's similar to what the Shulchan Aruch is saying, that I've placed God before me continuously. He really is there. It's just that it's easy to lose sight of it. It's easy to be distracted by other things. Here's something which you should make up your mind to have a constant part of the dimension of what's going on while you're conscious, while you're continuously conscious. And I could give you an analogy. It's like, let's say you're playing football. So there's the next play, and there's when you have perhaps a strain in a muscle, and the opposition player who's bigger than you are, and you have to block him, and so on and so on. All these things are going on. The one thing you never lose sight of is you're playing football. That's always there, with all these details and everything else. But you're playing football. That's the organizing idea behind everything. So even if you're focusing on how I'm going to block him, but it's how I'm going to block him to move our team forward to win the football game. The football game is part of everything that you do. Here too, I have to go and earn a living, and I have to visit people in the hospital, and I have to do my research. But all of these are in partnership with God, with God's presence continuously following me and surrounding me, with God's help giving me the ability to accomplish the things I need to accomplish. So that's the organizing idea that accompanies everything else that I do. It doesn't displace it, like we said about love. It doesn't displace it, but it accompanies it. And it's that having that idea in my mind is being in touch with an objective reality, that God really is there. I just insert a remark, and then I'll stop for questions. People talk a lot about spirituality. Spirituality is a victim of translation. You have different cultural traditions in different parts of the world, and they have somewhat similar practices, somewhat similar vocabularies. So I need an English word to describe it. We talk about Hindu spirituality and I Ching spirituality and South Sea spirituality, but they really are very different. They're really very different. They have some things in common, but covering them all with one word gives the illusion that they're all the same concept. And when you analyze them in detail, you see the differences between them. And one key difference, and it's not contained really in the English word spirituality, is the difference between a completely private experience It's how I feel, brother. That's how I feel. Versus a perception of something external that's real. It's not what I see when I close my eyes. It's what I see when I open my eyes and pay attention and test to make sure it's really there. For Jewish spirituality, it's perception, not dreaming, not fantasy or imagery, imagination. It's perception. So of course it's an experience, and it's a visual experience, but it's a visual experience of something real. So this idea of having this God idea is not just a question of describing my inner reality. It's a question of describing how I, in my inner world, relate to the outer world and represent it and interact with it and deal with it. So that's the idea of continuous creation, how it affects us spiritually. Questions up to here? Okay, so now the Ramchal ends the chapter with a list of basic Jewish beliefs. It comes out, since he's the creator and giving us existence, we are all dependent upon him, whereas he is not dependent upon us. So in the end, he says there are 6 basic Jewish beliefs. The essence of his existence, which is beyond our ability to know, and his perfection, which we spoke about in earlier sessions, his necessity of his existence, that he's not dependent upon anything else, his absolute simplicity, and his uniqueness. Now, one way to approach, I would say, if we say we don't understand at all what his existence consists of, how do we get any connection with it? And the one way to do it is to do it negatively. Instead of asking about God, ask about the world. Does the world carry itself or not? Can I just imagine the world, describe the world, and have a finished story with no loose ends, or not? Here's the difference. Here's the revolution that took place in 1965. That if you have a world that has always existed, always will exist, never changes, all of its basic laws remain the same, all of its basic entities remain the same. So then, that story of that world doesn't push any questions. You could ask where it came from, but the answer may be it didn't come from anywhere. But if you say 13.8 years ago, 18.8 billion years ago, our world started, that pushes the question, how come? Why did that happen? So he said, no, that's the whole story. It just started and then carried on from there. Nothing else to say. People aren't going to be satisfied. But why did it start? How did it start? That's why you have so many speculations as to eternal inflation, Alan Guthrie Company, or quantum fluctuations like Lawrence Krauss, all of which are incompetent. Because although they're superb scientists, they haven't studied philosophy, and they think philosophy is something you do, over cocktails for half an hour in the evening, and that's why their philosophical work is so sloppy. So the story doesn't carry itself. The story has a loose end. Yeah, but if it started 30 billion years ago, then there's got to be something responsible for that. Hawking at least recognized that it's going to push the question. Well, then something's responsible for it, and it sounds like God, and we didn't want that. So they invented something with no beginning to replace it from 1920s to 1965. It worked okay, sort of, and they avoided it. They still had a world with no beginning. Then it collapsed. You can look this up, and you can Google all this stuff. This is all public knowledge. And then the question forces itself. So if someone says, what do you need God for? I said, because you have an incomplete story. If you think about it, you realize it's an incomplete story. It doesn't carry itself. Something's got to be responsible for it. Maybe I don't know in detail what it is, but I can say my word God stands for whatever is responsible, whatever there is behind it. Because to say there's nothing behind it is to say something which isn't logical. Questions? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I see there's a difference when there's a creation, there's some logical step to say, okay, there has to be a creator. But the same way there's no logic placed on God, it's an infinite being, but we say, okay, how is that understood? It's not understood, it's not logical. Why can't that same thing be said about the starting of the universe? The idea of the Big Bang, before that there was no time, so we can't understand what that means before there was time. Then the beginning of the universe, suddenly there was time, and the expansion of the universe, that's the Big Bang.
Well, it depends on what you mean. If you mean there's something that I don't understand that's responsible for it, that's one thing. If you mean there's nothing responsible for it, that's another thing altogether. It's like if you discover that everyone with the last name Phillips dies on his 82nd birthday. Everyone. Not earlier and not later. What's responsible for that? Well, guess what? They all died of a heart attack. There's got to be something that's making the heart attack. And you say, well, what is that? I don't know. In my world, there isn't anything like that. Nothing that can reach to all people and always get them all heart attacks. I don't know of anything like that. They say, oh, so then why don't I just say it just happens? You know, what do I gain by saying there's something that I don't know that does it? Because this is the kind of thing that's done by things. And if I don't have a thing to do it, but still it's the kind of thing that's done by things. So it's a more correct picture to say there's something doing it that I don't understand than to say just that it happens and I don't understand it. Because it's not the kind of thing that just happens. That's the problem here. Problem here, things start, they develop and they go. There's something that does that. In all of our experience, something does that. So to say there's something doing it which I don't understand is much more reasonable than to say just it started. I don't understand it's starting. Right? In other words, asserting that there's an unknown agent is different from saying it happens by itself, even if the agent is something that I don't know.
Isn't that more a human trying to rationalize the things that we're not understanding? You're saying, oh, there must be an agent for something that we don't understand, versus saying, we don't understand it, so we don't understand it. Asserting there's something that created it is putting your own logic, however, coming to the same conclusion, there's something that's illogical.
Well, I would agree, except that you seem to hear in using our logic as somehow disconnected from reality. I would say all of science is that. All of science is trying to understand the world in human terms, and we have done tremendously successful things in using our logic to understand the world in human terms. That there are laws, that there are simple laws, that there are universal laws, that they operate, right? Isn't that just using our logic to make the world make sense to us? Yeah, it is, but it works. And it works because it gives demonstrable results. So the fact that it's human logic doesn't mean you can just ignore it as a kind of human fantasy. You know, you like to play chess, you like to speculate about the universe, it's all an internal game, has no objective purchase. On the contrary, it has a lot of objective purchase. All human science, Einstein said this, and certain philosophers said it as well. Every scientist is moved by the faith that the universe makes sense. It didn't have to make sense. Why does that make sense to us? Especially if we believe in evolution. There's nothing in evolution that explains why I can figure out why stars shine. Right? There's nothing in the development of my human intellect in avoiding the saber-toothed tigers and discovering which berries are poisonous, which will enable me to understand why the stars shine. Every scientist is moved by the faith the universe is understandable, and that he applies human tools to try to understand it. Right? So that means that's a way of grasping reality, not just playing an internal subjective game, which is no Nothing more to recommend it, the fact that it entertains us and amuses us.
So it's important, but it still reaches the same conclusion. This person, it's not so illogical to say something is not logical or it's not rational. We can't understand it. Versus saying it's an agent, and yet yet that agent is illogical.
I don't think so. An agent can do other things. If he did this, he could do other things also. Even if I don't understand what he is, but he could do other things. Maybe there are miracles which aren't understood. Maybe that's the same agent. Right? Maybe there are communications from that being. I don't understand what it is, but I understand some of the things that it does. An agent leaves it open to see other expressions of agency. Whereas to give up the agent, simply say, the origin itself is ununderstandable, takes you no further. That's what I think. Okay.